Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third day of the Shri Ram Research Festival 2021, a celebration of ideas hosted by the Economic Society, Shri Ram College of Commerce. With an aim to expand research horizons and stimulate intellectual discourse between eager minds and accomplished personalities, this festival aspires to acknowledge and amplify the drive for unique and authentic research. In this session, we are honored to have with us Dr. Krishnendu Dastidar, a professor of economics at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His areas of specialization are oligopoly theory and auction theory. He was educated at Presidency College, Kolkata, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He pursued his postdoctoral research from the Department of Economics at Harvard University. He has published, I hope I wasn't breaking the meeting, right? Okay.
No, it's fine, Ananda. We can hear you.
Okay. He has published in leading economic journals, such as the Journal of Economic Theory, the European Economic Review, amongst other famous economic-related journals. He also serves on the editorial board of the International Journal of Economic Theory. Sir, it is truly an enlightening experience to interact with knowledgeable academics such as yourself. Today's session will focus on Sir's area of expertise, basics of auction theory. We would like to encourage the audience to send in their questions as well as observations, if at all, through the chat box. And if required, we can also encourage certain participants to be promoted as panelists and engage in conversation. And without any further ado, I'd like to humbly invite Professor Dastidar to deliver his presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Ananda, for such a kind introduction. I must thank all of you, the Economic Society of SRCC, the professors at the Department of Economics, for providing me with this wonderful opportunity. Now, as I mentioned earlier in my email conversations with some of you, that since I'm primarily a theorist, I will stick to the theoretical part of it, okay? I am a very impractical person, so the practical things won't be there. I mean, some things would be there, but I do hope that you will get some interest in this area. Now, let me just talk about this. It's basic aspects of auction theory. Can I switch off my video, Ananda? Because I think there is some internet issues. It's better, right?
Sure, sir.
And during the question and answer session, I'll just plug it because this will be easier for me. Okay, thanks. So the title of my lecture is Basic Aspects of Auction Theory. Now let me start with the beginning. Okay, so what is it all about and why should we at all care for this? Okay, so here in this lecture, I'd like to lay out the stage and then discuss some of the key ideas. By the way, I'll avoid using any mathematics. Okay, it will all be prose. But just with a caveat, you should be used to thinking in mathematical terms because you can't do auction theory without that. But believe me, like any mathematics, things can be done in plain prose. Okay. Whatever language you choose, English, Hindi, Bangla, doesn't matter. Okay. So now first, why do you need an auction? What is that all? So imagine that I have written here, you are lucky enough to inherit a Picasso painting. I mean, of course, a teacher like me cannot afford to have it, but in economics, we always imagine things that are never there. So suppose, assume that you have something. And now assume that you are in dire straits and you need to sell it. Now, how should you go about it? Okay. Now, if you knew the potential buyers and their values, by values, I mean the maximum price the buyers are willing to pay for the painting. The answer is very simple. You just call the person with the highest value and sell this to him or her at a price equal to his value or less than his value, slightly less. He will lap it up. But the problem is that you have, as a seller, have only incomplete information about the buyer's values. And nor would the buyer be willing to reveal her actual value. A value is a maximum willingness to pay. Why should he be willing to reveal? So to arrive at some good price, you have to organize an auction. That's the starting point of really, I mean, after all, why do you need an auction? You can just have a take it or a leave it offer. A take it or a leave it offer is something what you observe in shops. A set of 6 bananas, let's say, cost 20 rupees. I mean, it means that either you pay me 20 rupees or not, I'll give it to you if you pay 20. Those things are called take it or leave it over. In auctions, you participate in the price formation process. And that becomes interesting and it's relevant when there is incomplete information. Okay, that's the point I want to stress. So the incomplete information about the buyer's values. Now, let me go to the next slide. Just a minute. Now, what about auctions in real life? I mean, as I said, why should we care for it? I mean, interestingly, auctions have always been there. I mean, there is a very interesting book, if you find time and if you get hold of this, it's by Cassidy. It's written long back. And it gives the history of auctions. Apparently, I read from there, it was there in Babylon in about 500 BC also. So it has been there before Jesus was born. Okay, so auctions have been there. Auctions with a precise set of rules emerged in 1595 when the Oxford English Dictionary first included the entry. And you must have heard about auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's. They were founded in 1744 and 1766. The point is auctions have been around for quite some time. Now, in real life, auctions account for an enormous volume of transactions across the globe. For example, I don't know whether you have heard about US Treasury auctions. They sell up billions of dollars of bills, notes, and bonds every week. Now, government procurement expenditure. Think of any government, when it buys in a procurement auction. That it is asked for tenders and typically buys it from the company quoting the lowest price. That's a procurement auctions. Governments all over the world purchase items like this. So procurement expenditure on an average constitute about 13% of GDP of OECD countries. This I got from the OECD report 2018. It's there on the website. You can check that. So it's a very statistically significant fraction of our GDP goes into auctions. Now, governments in many countries, of course, auction of rights to drill oil and other natural resources on state-owned properties. Even spectrum auctions, right? Spectrum is up in the air. It's sold of use in auction. Private firms are doing it all the time on the internet. Popular websites such as eBay are doing it all the time. So the point is auctions are practiced in real life. By the way, auction theory, although extremely mathematical, has immediate applications, as you can see. Now, as a discipline, as a discipline, when did it all start? Now, William Vickery, I don't know whether you have heard about him, who won the Nobel Prize in 1996 with Jim Merlis, is really the granddaddy of auction. So now this granddad is 1961 paper. It's a Seminar paper. It's set up. That's the start of auction theory, we say, as a discipline. Now, and Jim Merlis shared the prize with him in the same year. He also did some work. Now, it was followed in the 17 and 80s from these daddies, Meyerson, Maskin, Milgrom, etc. As you can see their name. They are the real important figures in auction theory. In fact, the 2007 Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded jointly to Hurwitz, Maskin, and Meyerson for having laid the foundation of mechanism design theory. By the way, auctions are special classes of mechanism. That's why mechanism design theory is directly related to auctions. And last year, Milgrom and Wilson, in fact, Milgrom was the student of Robert Wilson, a PhD student, they won it jointly for improvements to auction theory and invention of new auction format. So you can see the importance of discipline like auction theory within economics. 3 Nobel Prizes, thrice they have been awarded, okay? Unfortunately, auction theory, like in most things, is very male dominated, but for all my young daughter-like students, my daughter is also in college, by the way. All I can say, you must have heard of Susan Athey. She's an extremely well-known auction theorist nowadays, okay? So I please request all of you girls to get into auction theory, right? We need women there. Now, what exactly is an auction? An auction is a bidding mechanism. It is described by a set of rules that specify how a bidder is to be determined and how much he has to pay. Okay, and of course, auction rules may restrict participation and feasible bids. For example, a seller may impose a reserve price. A reserve price is nothing but saying bids below this are not acceptable. The typical scenario of an auction is as follows. I mean, that's a typical, it's not a general scenario. Imagine there is a seller with an indivisible, single indivisible object. It may be painting, house, or a tract of land, anything. Now, the seller does not know how much any buyer would be willing to pay for it. Now, so the auction is intended to produce the best sale price, okay? Now, a standard auction is where the object is sold to the highest bidder. Right, you can always imagine a crackpot having an auction where the object is sold to the third highest bidder, but those are not standard things. In the world, that's why we call it a standard auction, is where the object is sold to the highest bidder. Now, the value for a bidder, it's defined to be the maximum price he would be willing to pay. Now, the bidder knows his own value, but does not know others' value. This is, we are in the world of incomplete information, okay? So in game theory jargon, this is called the type of the bidder. I know how much I'm willing to pay. I don't know what you are willing to pay. Now, a procurement auction is one where the auctioneer is a buyer instead of a seller. Think of SRCC itself. I mean, when SRCC buys the computers for all its faculty, let's say it wants to buy 200 computers, then it will ask for bids or tenders from various dealers or companies. And typically what happens, the company which quotes the lowest price gets the contract. That's a procurement auction. Here, the auctioneer is a buyer instead of being a seller, okay? So, I mean, in India, public sector enterprises always purchases things using procurement auction. So procurement auctions are nothing but standard auctions in reverse. So instead of the highest bidder, the lowest bidder wins the contract. So there it is, okay? Now, in the world, there are 4 basic types of auctions. There are other auctions as well, which has been historically been practiced. And what are they? The first price seal bid auction, the second price seal bid auction, the English auction, and the Dutch auction. Now, I will now explain what each of these are and also tell you that they are being used in real life. So it's worth studying them. So what's the first price sale bid auction? See, suppose something is up for sale in a first price sale bid auction. So bidders simultaneously submit bids in sealed envelopes. So when you are submitting a bid, you don't know what others are quoting. Now the rules of the game say that the highest bidder will win and he will pay a price equal to his bid. So suppose there are 10 bidders and 100 is the highest bid, that chap will win and pay the 100. Now, in real life, it's used in auctioning mineral rights in government-owned land, and sometimes used in sales of artwork and real estate. And in procurement, it is often used. In fact, in India, that's the only form used. First price sealed bid auction. In procurement, it's the lowest bidder wins. Okay. Now, what's a second price sealed bid auction? The rules of the game are almost the same. The bidders submit bid in sealed envelopes. So when they're submitting their bids, they don't know what others are quoting. However, the catch is the highest bidder wins and pays a price equal to the second highest bid. That's why it's called a second price sealed bid auction. Suppose the highest bid is 100 and the second highest bid is 90. The chap quoting 100 will win the auction, win the object, but he will pay 90. Now, it's less prevalent than first price auction, but it's used. Sometimes the internet website eBay, if you check, this website uses this second price auction to sell off items. And this second price auction is also common in the stamp collecting business in the US. Now, what about an English or an ascending auction? As the name suggests, it originated in England. Now, this is what you see in movies. See, bidders orally cry out bids. So I will say 100, Ananda will say 150. And in the movies, the hero will come in and say 1 crore and get the object. So that's an English or an ascending auction. Now, auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's have been using it for the past 250 years. Paintings, Salvador Dali paintings, Picasso paintings, Princess Diana's jewelry, John Lennon's guitar, everything will be sold off using English auction. So it's extremely common. Even our income tax authorities, when it seizes, suppose some property, somebody is a defaulter, and it sells it using an English auction. Okay, it will call people who is interested and then. So it's very common. Now, there is something called a Dutch or a descending auction. Now, as the name suggests, it originated in Netherlands. Now, here the rules of the auctions are slightly different. The seller starts with a high price and says, are you willing to buy? And suppose all of you are buyers or bidders sitting in front of the seller. And if none of you say yes, I as a seller will decrease the price and keep on doing so till one of you says, stop, I want to buy it. Okay, so that's called a Dutch or a descending auction. It's called a descending auction because the price actually comes down from a high price. Now, it all started in Netherlands in the wholesale market of flowers. So every morning, wholesalers will come with bouquets of flowers, tulips and all, and say, okay, the auction starts, and the retailers will buy it, okay, participating in this Dutch auction. Fish is sold in a similar way in Israel, timber in Canada. In fact, when Google, the internet search engine, which we all use, went public in 2004, its shares were sold using a variant of the Dutch auction. So it's also used in real life. That's the point. Now, how do you model auctions? Now, auctions are modeled as games of incomplete information. So the basic tool is game theory, right? And the relevant equilibrium concept is called a Bayesian-Nash equilibrium. You must have heard the name of Nash equilibrium. It's named after John Nash. So Bayesian-Nash equilibrium is the extension of the concept of Nash equilibrium in the world of incomplete information. By the way, have you seen the movie on John Nash, A Beautiful Mind? You must, yeah, it's a great movie. So what's the benchmark model? I mean, the starting point of any auction theory. So what it says, suppose there is one indivisible item up for sale, say a painting, and there is one seller and some bidders. Now, the bidder's value or the maximum price he is willing to pay is private information. Now, this term is often used in economics. This means I know this, you don't know. This is my private information. Your private information is your willingness to pay. So bidder knows his or her own value, but does not know others' values. By value, I mean the maximum willingness to pay. And he only knows that other values lie in an interval with some known distribution function. As I promised, I'm not using any symbols. But as you know, I can't get away from mathematics or statistics. Okay, so it's like that. I don't know Ananda's value, but I know it's spread over, say, 0 to 100 with some interval, with some distribution. That's the idea. Seller also does not know any bidder's value, only knows that all values lie in an interval with some distribution function. That's how it is modeled. Now, like anything in economics, the benchmark model is based on some assumptions. By the way, let me clarify that auction theory is rich enough to relax all these assumptions and see what happens. It's like perfect competition model, then you relax it, get into imperfect competition model and things like that. So this benchmark model was also based on some assumptions. Now, what are they? Number one assumption, it's called private values. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, the value or the maximum willingness to pay for the object just depends on your own taste and preferences and nothing else. And I won't change my value even if I were to know your value. But in case of interdependent values, this thing doesn't hold. Because if I know you value it very highly, I will also change my value. But in a private value case, it just depends on my tastes and preferences. I like a painting because I like it, okay, or I don't like it, right? That's what. Now, number two is independent types. It's a technical assumption. It just says you, see, I don't know all others' maximum willingness to pay. They're like random variables to me. I assume that they're independently distributed. And symmetry means they're identically distributed. So independence and symmetry means the others' values are IID. You must have heard about this term very often. And lastly, we assume everybody is risk neutral. Of course, all these assumptions can be relaxed and see what happens. But the starting point of auction theory starts with these assumptions, the canonical or the benchmark point. And I'm sure all of you know what risk neutrality is in economics. It's used in a specific way. Okay. Now, so let's try what would happen in this model. Suppose in this world where this assumptions hold true, where one unit is up for sale, and you organize a second price auction. So what's the winner's payoff? It says value minus the second highest bid. He gets the object, he values it at something, maybe 100, minus what the price he pays. That is the second highest. The losers don't get the object, don't pay anything, they get zero. Now, what Vickery in his 1961 Seminal paper showed that regardless of what others are bidding, you will always bid your value. That is truth-telling in game theory parlance is a dominant strategy equilibrium. Irrespective of other players' bids, you will bid your value. So what will happen? Who will win the object? A person with the highest value. And how much will he pay? The value of the second highest bidder. Now, In the private value model, the second price auction is equivalent to English auctions. Now, the reason is very simple. See, what is happening in an English auction? Bidders are orally trying out bid and the price is rising. And till such time where there is a price reached and nobody outquotes this price. Now, imagine that this can be modeled in the following way. As if price is rising and bidders are dropping off. Okay, I don't want to outbid this. Now, when will the second last person drop off? When the price reaches the second highest value, then only one person remains. He gets the object. So the person with the highest value gets the object at a price equal to the second highest value. So in essence, for private value auction, second price auction is equivalent to English auction. Now, what about first price auction? Now, that's a bit complicated. It's mathematically and technically also demanding, but I'll just give you a sort of intuitive feel. So here, the highest bidder wins and pays the price that he quotes. Losers get zero. The winner is the highest bidder. Since the winner pays the amount that he has quoted, it is never optimal to bid one's value, because in that case, his payoff would be zero. So players must always bid below their values. However, there is a caveat. The lower you bid, the lower is your probability of winning. The higher is the chance somebody else will outbid you. But it's also true that lower your bid, the higher is your payoff, conditional on winning the object, because you have to pay less. So in equilibrium, these two effects must balance each other out. And auction theorists have given us a very nice formula. It looks very intimidating, but believe me, it's simple and precise. Okay. If you had in a first price auction, what will be the equilibrium? It will be less than that. Okay. Now, in this slide, I show one can argue that the Dutch auction is strategically equivalent to the first price auction, just as English auction is equivalent to the second price auction. See, what's happening in a Dutch auction, price is coming down. And as soon as one of the bidders say, I want to buy it at that price, the auction ends. So basically what you have to decide at what price you will say, stop, I want to buy. If somebody does it before that, I mean, too bad, you don't get. So essentially the scenario is same as a first price auction, where you have to just mentally compute how much should I bid? How much should I write in the seed number? Okay. So the Dutch auction is strategically equivalent to the first price auction. Now, there is a very famous theorem in auction theory. It's called the revenue equivalence theorem. Now, just let me explain it a bit. Now, you may ask why at all have different kind of auction. Let's think of first price and second price. In a first price auction, highest bidder wins and pays that price. In a second price auction, the second highest bidder wins and pays the second highest bid as the price. You may ask me justifiably, I mean, why should an auctioneer do that? I mean, why should you? But you know, if you know, as if you as a bidder know that a second price auction will be conducted, you will jack up your bid. You will bid your value. In a first price auction, you won't bid your value. You'll bid less than your value. So what is the expected price or revenue? See here, revenue is same as price because only one unit is being sold, right? Revenue is just price multiplied by quantity. So in this case, since one unit is being sold, revenue is same as price. Now, Vickery showed that the expected price an auctioneer would get in a first price auction is always equal to the expected price in a second price auction in this model. Now, this theorem is much more general. It's a remarkable theorem. And in fact, Meyerson gave us the most general version. Now, I'm giving you a loose version, which is in the benchmark model with IID values, the expected revenue from most auctions are the same. So it doesn't matter really which auction you are using. So it's a very powerful result, but it's only true under those 4 or 5 assumptions which I have mentioned. Now, this revenue equivalence theorem is a very fundamental theorem in auction theory. I mean, the Dutch auction, the English auction, in fact, there are all kinds of, there are very funny auctions like sad loser auction, where only the loser pays, the winner doesn't pay. That also is, it doesn't matter. The seller on an average will get the same price under these assumptions. Okay, so it's a very powerful theorem. Now, what about optimal auctions? Now, by the way, just to tell you this, auctions I mentioned in the beginning is a special kind of mechanism. See, in mechanism design theory, what we do is as follows. In game theory, some of you, if you have done some game theory, you know, we study interactions among agents. It may be firms, it may be individuals, and we predict outcomes. What would happen if they do this and this? And such outcomes are typically predicted as Nash equilibrium outcomes. Okay, such would happen. Now, mechanism design theory is game theory standing on its head. It says, suppose you want an outcome. Is it possible to frame rules of the game in such a way so as to arrive at that outcome in an equilibrium? Okay, so just imagine, so it's called reverse engineering. I mean, people have won Nobel Prizes for it. Watson is a great exponent of that. Now, so suppose think of, you have something up to sell, anything. At least in principle, is there a way? Can you devise rules in such a way so that your expected selling price would be maximized? As a seller, naturally, you would like to do that. Now, Myerson, in his remarkable 1981 paper, cracked this problem. At least he showed in principle it is possible. In practice, of course, it's a different matter, that you can devise some mechanism, and calls it an optimal auction, which maximize the seller's expected revenue for a wide class of problems. Okay, that was a remark. In fact, this Myerson 1981 paper is one of the best papers in economics written after post-World War. I mean, Nash's paper would be one, Akerloff's paper would be one, Myerson. So if you think of 10 most important papers in economics written after World War II, Myerson's paper would be one. And if you go into higher studies, you have to read that. Okay, it's technically demanding, but fun to read. Now, what about generalizing the benchmark model? As I said, the benchmark model has some restrictive assumption, but no problem. Auction theorists have generalized it. So asymmetry, the distributions are no longer the same. Risk aversions, bidders need not be risk neutral, they can be risk averse. We assumed IID, identically and independently distributed types, and it can relax that and say types are correlated, no problem. And most importantly, values are interdependent. See, the benchmark model assumes private values. My maximum willingness to pay depends only on my tastes and preferences, and I won't change my value even if I were to know your thing. But when values are interdependent, it's different. If I come to know of your value, I will change mine, and this stands in contrast to that of private values. Okay, so your value for a painting may depend not only on your private information, that is how much you like it, but also somewhat on others' private information, because this affects the resale value and the prestige of owning it. Okay, because if I would like to have something which my neighbors also like, okay, so they will be jealous. I mean, this is pure human thing, okay? And of course, you can have multi-unit auctions where more than one unit is of sale. I mean, auction theory is rich enough to take care of all these complications. It starts with a very simple model, but then slowly it relaxes this and takes care of all this. Now, let me talk about something called common value auctions. Now, the value of the object being sold is the same for all bidders, but this value is not known at the time of bidding. Okay. So it's like a typical example would be, say, oil or coal resources underneath the ground. So when Government of India goes for coal block auctions, these are common value auctions. Remember, the amount of coal underneath the ground is same for all companies, so that won't change. But each company has a different geological signal of it. So I think, okay, Reliance would think this is so much coal. Adani Group would think this is so much coal. But the amount of coal, these are all imperfect signals. And that is only known after the bidder starts drilling. But before that, it's not known. Such things are called common value. Now, Wilson, who won the Nobel Prize along with Milgrom, showed us how to theoretically analyze common value auctions. Now, associated with common value auction, there is something which is called a winner's curse. Now, you may ask, the winner should be happy, but in common value auction, I mean, winner at times can be cursed. Now, the idea is, see, who will win in a common value? Typically, the way we model it, the company or the person who will win the rights to drill coal or oil is the company which has the highest geological signal. They would bid the highest. But if you have the highest signal, it means others have signals lower than yours. So the announcement that I have won leads to decrease in estimated value. So I must now factor in that. So others are lower. Since before winning it, I did not know what other signals were. I mean, they would not reveal that to me. Now, the failure to foresee this effect and take it fully into account while formulating bidding strategies will result in winner's curse, the possibility that the winner pays more than the value. Now, although it's in theory you can overcome this, but in practice it often happens. And in experimental economists have shown that this happens in practice in real life. People tend in the common value auction tend to bid more than the actual value often. Now, however, in an equilibrium, winner's curse at a theoretical should not take place. So in equilibrium, bidders should take into account the possibility that they might overestimate the true value of the object and should bid more cautiously. Now, Wilson provided the first rigorous theoretical analysis of this. Okay, so winner's curse do take place in real life, but in theory, in principle, at least it should not take place. But we are, after all human, right? We tend to bid more. Now, just a historical anecdote on the winner's curse. Now, I am not a historian. I got it from this book by Shubik. Now, he talks about the Roman Empire, I mean, AD 193. Apparently, the entire Roman Empire was sold by an ascending auction by the Praetorian Guards then. Now, the winner and therefore the next emperor was somebody called Didius Julianus, who reigned for just over 2 months before being overthrown and executed by the next ruler, Severus. So it's really a very tragic and, I mean, I find it comic case of winner's curse. The guy was beheaded, actually, the winner. Okay. So this, I got it from Shubik's book. I am not a historian, but this book has very nice historical anecdotes on auctions. Now, let me quickly go to interdependent value auction. How much time do I have, Ananya?
So we can take another 5-7 minutes.
Okay, I'll quickly, the last few slides, I'll just quickly go. Now, interdependent value auctions, see, we started with independent private value auctions and then talked about pure common value. They are limiting cases. In between, there is something called interdependent value auctions. Okay, so my value depends on not only on my own tastes and preferences, but yours as well. I don't know your tastes and preferences, I only can guess. Now, Milgrom, last year's Nobel Prize winner, laid the groundwork of analysis of such things. Okay, and I'm not going into this case. And they also analyze models where signals are affiliated. Now, affiliation is a strong form of positive correlation. And it means if the subset of all signals are large, then this makes it more likely that the remaining signals are also large. This is, if you read auction theory, this paper is a must read. Okay. Now, what an important result that he proved that with interdependent values and affiliated segments, revenue equivalents do not hold. And expected revenue in the English auction would be higher than second price auction, and which in turn would be higher than the first price auction. So no wonder all those paintings and those things are sold using English auctions. Sotheby's and Christie's, the auction houses are not stupid. They are just extracting everything from the buyers they can. Okay, so no revenue equivalence here. Now, an auction outcome is said to be efficient if the bidder with the highest value is awarded the object. In the benchmark model, the outcome is always efficient, but not so in the interdependent value model. Okay, I'll quickly. Now, just in 3-4 minutes, I'll end. Now, during 90s, the main research focus shifted to multi-object auctions like spectrum frequency band, electricity, batches of troubled debt, etc. And the number and size of the transactions of these objects, multi-object auctions means it's not just one object up for sale, but many at the same time. That's spectrums of different frequency. I mean, in India, we are always doing it, 3G auctions, 4G auctions and things. Okay. Now, there are many challenges, and that includes complementarities between objects, externalities across participants, and things like that. And these call for invention of new auction formats. And lo and behold, Milgrom and Wilson, the teacher-student combination, had given us lots of them. Okay, I will not go into the details. I'll just tell you what they are. Now, Wilson talked about share auctions. A share auction is nothing but where part of something is sold. So bidders can bid for fractions. Okay, suppose 1 lakh treasury bonds are being sold. A bidder said, okay, I'll buy 10% of it at this price, and things like that. Then there is very famous simultaneous ascending auction. By the way, when India went for 3G, 4G auctions, it used a version of simultaneous ascending auction. Then there is something called a combinatorial clock auctions and incentive auctions. Now, you may ask me why I'm dumping all this onto you. Believe me, they're being used. And why are they used? Of course, now, in simultaneous ascending auctions, all licenses are available for bidding at the same time throughout the entire auction, and then thus the term simultaneous. Okay, and it became a workhorse model. I want to just spend a minute on it. See, in 1994, FCC is Federal Communication Commission. They raised some $20 billion. Now, it was the first time in history when actually auction theorists, including Milgrom, were invited by the Clinton administration to design auctions in such a way so as to maximize the expected revenue coming to the government. And they did that successfully. Earlier, only bureaucrats used to do that. And you know how bureaucrats mess up everything, right? So This was the first time. So then if a Milgrom was associated, then Binmore and Klemperer was called to do it for the UK 3G option. Again, it was a big success. But unfortunately, like everything in life, there were fiascos, there were some notable failures, and auction theorists must deserve some of the blame. Okay. And immediately after that, people analyzed the weaknesses, and theoretically they came out and what were the problems with simultaneous ascending auctions. And there's something called exposure problem because it does not allow for package bids and things like that. So they came up with something else. Just a minute, just a minute. And what was the something else? Combinatorial clock auctions, which allowed for package bids. I'm going through it quickly. So simultaneous ascending auctions had some problems. They identified it both theoretically and empirically. And Milgrom, of course, then along with others, designed this combinatorial clock auction. Okay, there were successes, but then there were drawbacks too, like anything in life. Lo and behold, they analyzed that and came up with incentive auctions. Something. Now, incentive auctions was adopted as late as in 2017. Okay. When you were in possibly class 9 or 10. Okay. Now, this design combines two separate but interdependent auctions. The first is a reverse auction that determines the price at which the remaining over-the-air broadcasters, it was in an air broadcasting case, voluntarily relinquish their existing spectrum. The second is a forward auction of the freed up spectrum. Again, it was a big success, as I have mentioned here. However, there are immense computational complexities in order to design the reverse auction. I mean, it's immensely complicated. So as I have mentioned, the search for the perfect auction continued. So simultaneous ascending auction was introduced. It had some problem. Then combinatorial clock auctions, some problems, and incentive auctions. So to end, what makes an auction successful? Well, there is no silver bullet. The crucial concern is the ability of the bidders to collude, but theoretical work on this issue is rather limited. So what matters in auction design are the same issues that any industry regulator would recognize as key concerns: discouraging collusive entry, deterring and behavior. And of course, auction designers need to be sensitive to the dangers posed by political and administrative pressures all over the world. Okay, the Chacha Bhatija syndrome, we all know, right? A politician or a bureaucrat would like to give a contract to his or her relatives. I mean, you have to be sensitive, and they would always put pressure on you. So auctions designers need to be sensitive to that. By the way, why should we at all care? I started with this because it is one of economic success stories. Now, Paul Klemperer, you can go to his site, all his papers are available site, and others have demonstrated that many economic contexts which do not at first sight look like auction can be recast to use auction theoretic techniques. And in fact, you should read in the news and the website of Paul Klemperer, there is a delightful article called "Why Every Economist Must Know Some Auction Theory." This thing, okay. And lastly, why should you read it? It's great fun. That's why you should do it. Okay, sorry, towards the end, I just rattled off. Okay, and I'll end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was an extremely enlightening session for sure. We'll go on to certain questions we have, and I think this was really insightful, even going through the different models that there, because I don't think any of us has had that kind of exposure to understand the different variants that exist. The one question that we have from the audience is, from DS Lokhanathan is, can an auction be considered as the most practical form of first degree price discrimination in monopolies? Is that a analogy that we can consider?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I did not when I talked about Meyerson's optimal auction, how to design a selling mechanism so as to maximize the expected price accruing to the seller. Later, Bulow and Klemperer wrote a paper where they show that Marsan exercise is nothing but like a discriminating monopolist thing. It's equivalent. It's also a later. So certainly it's related. And it's a very good question. Yeah.
Great, sir. Another question that we have is, you spoke about the Chacha Bhatija syndrome. So talking about auction theory and how it works in the Indian context, do you think that, and this is something we discussed during the session as well, do you think, what is there's a lot of corruption that does take place in these processes, the 4G spectrum sale or telecom, all of these things. So is there a way where we can provide for mitigation mechanisms?
Yeah, in fact, the literature on this is a bit sketchy. There are some papers which try to analyze corruption in auction, but there hasn't been too many papers which try to say you want to design an auction which is corruption proof, right? That's your ultimate aim. I mean, no such paper has at least in principle come out. I mean, so there's a lot of scope for work on that. People have thought about it. Yeah, they can solve some problems. Okay, we can plug this loophole, but then something else opens up. I mean, it's very complex, right?
Definitely.
And my personal is, if the system is thoroughly corrupt, there is very little you can do.
Yeah, I think it becomes a question of how many leaks do you plug?
Yeah. I mean, but there can be interesting theoretical work on it. Some people have done some work, and in fact, when you grow up, and if some of you go into research, you can work on it. Because this area has immense potential. It's not been explored that well. And even in the Indian context, okay?
Right. So another thing that I found really interesting was the idea of the winner's curse. And even though we spoke about how to, let's say, maximize expected revenue, right, which from whatever intermediary understanding I had is from the point of view of the seller. So how can a buyer ensure that the value or that the price that they're paying for this particular commodity is actually accurate? How do you mitigate winner's curse? How do you ensure that the bidders are valuing the item accurately? If the question.
See, in a common, at least in principle, you can. In a common value auction, you have to do a mental computation. If I were to win, suppose you are a big businessman and you are bidding for drilling rights of oils. Now, you have some vague estimate of the oil underneath, and others have. Now, you must now think about this. If I actually win the auction, that means I have my estimate for the oil is more than the others. What I estimate, my guess that this much is that. I mean, my guess is based on my geologist advice. But then, I mean, others have also employed geologists. So if then that amount of oil may not be there, so I must revise my estimate. So you have to think it through. If I were to win, my estimate would be highest, but then others are lower, but then that means it's actually not that high. So accordingly, I should win. But in practice, what happens in Hindi, we say, na, Josh mein aake, they tend to bid very high. Okay, that's what happens. Now, I can see some questions on the chat box. One of you have said, Karthik Reddy, can we classify bank recoveries as English auction where the bank authority seizes property of defaulters and auction? Yes, if it is sold in an English auction. It depends on what auction form is being used. Okay, certainly, sometimes income tax authorities use in English auction, but in this case, it's a bank. Now, Harving Kaur has two questions. What is risk neutrality? Now, I'll just give you an example because it's a micro-theoretic concept. Think of two scenarios. In one scenario, you get ₹100 with certainty, with probability 1. In another scenario, you get ₹50 with probability half and ₹150 with probability half. So the expected payoff there is ₹100 with half probability. Now, if you are risk neutral, you would be indifferent between these two outcomes, whether to get 100 with certainty or whether to go for that lottery where you get with half probability 50 and half 150. But if you are risk averse, you will prefer the 100 with certainty. In economics, of course, the mathematical definition is that the utility function of money is linear, then you say it's risk neutral. If it's concave, it's risk averse. And Herwin has another question. In Dutch auction, is a level set before and below which the price will not go? Yeah, the seller often does. So it's called a reserve price. Certainly, we can do that. In real life, it always happens. I haven't given you so many details, but believe me, auction theory is real fun. It's very mathematical, but it also has immense practical applications. So all of you, at least some of you, should think of working on it.
Thank you, sir. And thank you so much for answering all of the questions in such great detail. Since the Nobel Prize in Economics of 2020, understanding auction theory allows us, I think, to better understand how agents interact in a society, and therefore have definitely helped us understand the organization of society as a whole as well. I believe I speak for everyone when I say that this session has been extremely invaluable for all of us. On behalf of the students and staff at Sriram College of Commerce, the Economic Society, and all the participants present here today, I would like to wish our sincere gratitude for sparing your time and for providing us with such an insightful session on auction theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ananda. Thanks to all of you for providing me with this wonderful opportunity. I hope some of you will come to JNU and I'll teach you auction theory. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.